For the duration of our conversation, we're actually just going to keep the group muted until after Q&A, until it's time for Q&A. Just so you know, we don't have people jumping in and interjecting. It's going to be a recorded talk tonight.
Very good. Very good.
But nonetheless, thank you for joining us. And looks like we have a good turnout so far. We're only 1 minute in, and most of the participants are here, so that's good. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Before we get started, we're just going to maybe just give another 5 minutes to let the rest of the people join. So in the meantime, I'm going to catch up with Stephen a bit, so just hang tight before we get things started for real. Stephen, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was good, man. I had a chance to have my dad visit. I hadn't seen him for a while. He came out from Georgia before they said don't travel for quarantine. So, got to get some good family time with my dad and my 2 daughters, my wife. So very chill, very good.
Mm-hmm.
How about you?
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear on your end. And my Thanksgiving was good as well. I think anytime you can get together with the family, it's great.
Yeah.
I'm Haitian, so I love my Haitian food for the holidays.
Nice.
Yeah. So ate good, and spent a lot of time with the family.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I went crabbing for the first time over Thanksgiving.
Oh wow,
Cool.
Where in the valley?
Yeah, I live here. I live, right next to the Golden Gate Bridge. So I was crabbing right out there. There are a bunch of Dungeness crabs in season now. So yeah, that's one of the new things. I like to be in the water a lot.
Nice. Did you guys get to make a nice little seafood boil or not really?
Oh, you know this, man. Oh yeah. My folks are like New Orleans, that Creole thing. So yeah, we crabs are in trouble now. I got a boat. This gonna be a problem for them.
You might have to send some funding to the fishermen.
I'm working on that actually, and when we get into it, we may talk about this. But I personally I love fishing. I love the ocean, and I've been working on a project that relates to seafood, Black entrepreneurship, health. So we can probably touch on that in the course of our conversation.
Okay, for sure. And I'm actually just curious to know too, how has COVID been for you? Has everything been okay? Has business been okay, or has maybe business been better with us going into a digital world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, of course, COVID has just been horrible. For starters, it's just, I'd say there's nothing good about it. The response to it has been mixed. In a lot of ways, it's obviously created a bunch of shock and pressure and grief and death. It's all that stuff is horrible. On the other hand, I think it has brought into sharp relief a lot of the disparity that we've been working on as a firm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's easier for people to see, how the disparities in our society affect people disproportionately. And it's just showing up in undeniable ways through the numbers, from COVID. And I would also say it forced us, or we chose to respond in a big way. So for example, we took on 47 interns this summer.
Wow.
To work on health disparities of different kinds. We had 13 different teams, 47 interns working on, type 2 diabetes, looking at how community funding for public hospitals is actually spent, looking at how we can get Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements for certain services, a bunch of issues like that, where these disparities show up. And so I would say we have both, COVID has really prodded us to up our game in ways that, we always try to be on top of our game, but this really was like, you got us, like, if not us, who, if not now, when, like it's clear that it's our time to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And not just in this moment, but, as exemplified by the work with the interns, we're trying to build the next wave
Yeah.
and reach back and pull forward, the next generation of folks that are going to be doing the East Side work that we're building. So we feel good about that. We feel good about the response. Do
Mm-hmm.
not feel good about the general circumstance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. It definitely was a very tough time for, people everywhere. But
Yeah.
that's great that you guys had such a good response to COVID and, you gave opportunity to other people. You got yourself some good data to work with. I actually maybe just want to give a shout out to Nora. She works with us in the university. She's on the call and I know she's working on a few sustainability initiatives as well as she does some stuff for GIS. Maybe that could be somebody good for you to connect with.
Yeah, we love GIS. I mean, our whole thing about East Side communities and mapping disparity, where there are physical, geographic differences between haves and have-nots. I mean, it happens in all sorts of different ways. Usually these processes are invisible and hard to explain to folks. But when you start getting data sets and
Mm-hmm.
you can see these disparities, GIS is, I think, one of the most powerful tools to help just lay it out
Yeah.
in ways that people can see. Pictures worth 1,000 words. So yeah, I would love that, Nora.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. We'll connect together after the call. So before we get started, one last question. Any good books you've been reading during COVID?
Yes, man. I love that you asked that question. Let's turn around, look at the bookshelf, and see what's popping back here.
Yes,
I,
educate me.
my favorite book right now is this one right here. Um, if you can see, this book is called Cast by
Okay.
Isabel Wilkerson. She was author of The Warmth of Other Suns, but this book, Cast, is really looking at how we uh, segment ourselves in society. And I think we're accustomed to talking about race in the U.S. But she's looking at caste in the way that caste is set up in India, the caste system,
Mm-hmm.
Brahmins and so forth. And it looks through the three lenses: the case of Indian caste, it looks at race in the U.S., and it looks at stratification around the Jewish um, community and associated history. And by looking at those three lenses and pulling back from each particular one, but looking at the big picture that runs
Mm-hmm.
through each of them, it's a really powerful view at the same thing I was just talking about with Nora, those kinds of forces that are often invisible until there's some mechanism, whether it's GIS mapping or a book like Cast that helps bring it into relief, and you can see it and say, man, I hadn't thought of it that way. But when you frame it the way she does, it's kind of undeniable, and it's also diabolical, and
Mm-hmm.
it's clear that we need to dismantle a lot of these systems.
Yeah. I agree. That sounds like a good book. Definitely will pick that up. Hopefully it's on Audible, and I'll definitely listen
It
to it.
is on Audible. I both listened to it on Audible and I have the text. There's some really good stuff that I was hearing that I felt like really warranted, being in text. Next up is President Obama's book. I haven't hit that. I'm like in the last chapter or two of Cast. So as soon
Okay.
as I finish that, I'll flip into uh, our president's book.
All right. That sounds good. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have a good amount of participants. So I think we could go ahead and get started. So once again, thank you, Stephen, for joining us tonight.
Glad to
I'm
be
Jeff.
here.
I'm Jeff DeRose, Business Development Manager at the CSI Tech Incubator. The CSI Tech Incubator is focused on building a tech hub on Staten Island, but more than just creating a place that our local Staten Islanders can tap into to get business resources and get access to tech education for further opportunities. We also want to create a space where our Black and Latinx entrepreneurs can also tap into throughout New York City to get resources for their businesses, get support for their businesses. And that's why we're curating programs like Tech Talk, bringing in speakers like Stephen Deberry, who's passionate about investing in Black and Latinx communities. And just want to say again, thank you, Stephen. And before we get started, also just want to give a shout out to our promotional partners, to Communitas Americas. They did a phenomenal job of, promoting us on social media and, giving us a nice social media push. Also want to give a nice shout out to the NYEDC, New York Economic Development Corporation. They are doing all kind of things in New York City. Specifically, they have a project that they're working on where they want to help bridge the gap between venture capital and Black and Latinx founders, as well as female founders. So I just want to say thank you to the NYEDC and thank you to Marissa for joining us tonight. And yeah, let's get started. So Stephen, maybe can you just tell us a bit about your background and how you got started in tech?
Yeah, sure. I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. I started my first, I call it business. I guess is a little side hustle. But I was 9 years old. I was living in Southern California, and my parents lived near a golf course. Like, nothing fancy, but it was like a public golf course and everything. The thing was, apparently there were a bunch of bad golfers because they would hit their balls into my yard. And so I realized this was happening across the entire length of the golf course. So I would just get my friends and we'd go, collect balls from people's yards, and they didn't mind. They're like, yeah, great, take them. And we'd go clean them up and then go back to the tee boxes and sell the used golf balls back to other golfers. And that was my first business. It was great. It was like free inventory, a little bit of hustle. And like I had that ice cream truck money, you know what I mean? When I was 9,
Yes.
I was like, this is great, and it was like, it was addictive. So I did that. And then, there was always another business. I started like bootlegging Prince tapes when I was in like 6th grade. And then, you know what I mean? Just like different little things. I think my first real business was after I graduated from UCLA. So I'll date myself. I came out in 95 as an undergrad at UCLA. And that was right around the time that Netscape went public, one of the first web browsers. And it was kind of when the consumer internet became a thing.
Yeah.
And so my first company was a web development company. We built websites for people. And this was in the era where you really had to explain to people what a website was. It's like, it's kind of like the yellow pages, but you can update it dynamically and, blah, blah, blah. And so that was my first company and really what got me into tech.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so what was that experience like for you, like running this web development company during, I guess we could say, Internet 1.0 and, the tech bubble and the tech boom? Like, what was that ride like for you?
I mean, in a funny way, man, it was just like selling the used golf ball, business. It was just a way to be creative and try to create some value, and to make something out of nothing. I literally, so when I started this web development company, I did not own a computer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but I wanted to be in, so I kind of finessed my way into my girlfriend's computer lab
Okay.
and taught myself HTML on the university computers. And then I had a guy who hired me to he wanted me to build. I sold my first web build deal,
Okay.
but I didn't have a computer. So I was like, well, how am I going to work this? And so I this guy had an office. He needed to have computers set up for his new office. And so I bought several computers. I charged him to have me configure those computers for him. And then on one of the new computers, I built the website for him and then was able to charge him for that. And so that's how I got the money to get my business started. And I think there's an important lesson in that, for those that are building companies today, because I think one of the best sources of financing is customers, not people not venture investors, not the banks, but if you can actually get a paying customer, especially if they'll pay you in advance, I mean, that's the best form of financing, you know?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and just to maybe like pivot from like talking about your background, what are your thoughts on that? I think like we're in this tech or entrepreneurial culture of like I'm just gonna build and everything's gonna be free or whatever, but I'm just gonna get money from VCs. I'm just gonna get money from investors, and that's like the business model: just fundraise, fundraise, fundraise. I personally think that that is a horrible approach to business. I think
Yeah,
like you should be going out there and trying to get customers and trying to find ways to generate revenue. But it
yeah.
seems like that's not the herd mentality. I'm just curious on like
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that perspective?
No, I think you're spot on. I think what most people don't understand is, as much as people like to talk about venture capital, um, it is not the best tool for most businesses. It
Hmm.
is the rare exception that it actually makes sense for a business to use venture capital. And it's for a few reasons. One is that, venture capital looks for exceptionally high returns. It's high risk, it's high reward. And most businesses simply do not have the growth profile that venture capital is looking for. You're looking for, 10x, 100x, 1000x returns in venture capital. And most businesses do not have that profile. And they can be great, solid, large, successful, sustainable businesses
Hmm.
that do not have that profile. So that's one point. I think another point is for those who, really have had experience with venture capital or venture capitalists, they will have learned the hard way, most likely, that the best way to attract venture capital is to not need venture capital. Like
Hmm.
venture capitalists are, uh, experts at maintaining option value, which is why they rarely say no outright. It's always, I'll come back to you. Need a little more time. You know what I mean? VCs are always trying to maintain option value just in case your deal's the one that gets hot. I don't want to have said no to you, you
Hmm.
know. Um, and so there's this sort of, you know, just like in the real estate market, sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's a seller's market. The leverage in venture deals move back and forth between entrepreneurs and investors. And the best way to have leverage as an entrepreneur is to do what I said at the outset: get your customers to finance you. I think most VCs will lean in further when an entrepreneur walks into the office or into a Zoom meeting these days and says, I've got all these customers paying me, and man, we have a capacity problem. Uh, but I'm not sure if I want to raise money or not. I'm not sure who I want to work with. Well, that's when venture investors start leaning in heavy, you
Yeah.
know. But to walk in the door with an assumption that I'm just going to raise a bunch of venture capital and figure out a business model is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I agree with that 100%. Um, and just going back, actually, I'm just curious about this stuff. Like I'm jumping from topic to topic because I was too a web developer a few years back. I started my own web development business. I'm just curious, what were the going rates for a website in 1995?
Oh man.
Gotten so
I
cheap.
mean, I mean, I did relatively simple sites. I don't know, 10, 20K, something like that.
I wish I was charging that for a WordPress website. you
Well, when I did it, there weren't the same sorts of tools. You didn't have WordPress, you didn't have Squarespace. The consumer web is way more like, in the same way Cass can go on Spotify and act like a DJ. Like, you're not, no, like, it's not, what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it's similar with the web.
know.
Um, and as with most businesses, it's all about segmentation as well. I mean, there are those customers that will pay that. There are customers that'll pay 100 rand or multiples of that for a website. But it's about getting to uh, the brands that have the budget, getting the distribution, et cetera. So I mean, there's a range.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. And just to maybe just
What's the going rate today?
it depends. I mean, with all the outsourcing and stuff like that, I mean, there was a point for like maybe like a 3 to 5 page website, with just maybe that's an e-commerce functionality. I was maybe charging like $800, like a customized
Yeah,
template, you know.
right, right. But you
But
could do that in a matter of hours, maybe even minutes now.
yeah, days, hours, minutes. Yeah, I mean not minutes, but maybe a few hours for a few days. If it's a
Yeah.
website, that's a few hours. And I was maybe charging like 500 or 600 bucks. But for me, when I started my company, um, I realized that there was kind of a gap where everyone's doing this overseas hiring but still charging American rates. Like I kid you not, there was a guy running an overseas operation charging like $15,000 for a website. My friend was telling me about that, and he just thought that, hey, like that's what people charge. And I was like, man, this guy's probably paying his developers like 300 bucks. you know?
Well, this is the global economy that we're in, and I think more of us need to start playing that game. When I was so I started my company in 1995. By the time, so in 96, I had moved to graduate school. I was living in England. I was going to grad school at Oxford, and
hmm
I played a version of that game, because I would charge. I mean, I charge my college. I charge my business school, for example. They were clients of mine,
Nice.
and I charged them in British pounds. Um, so I got basically 1.6 my price in US dollars
Oh
just
my,
for being across borders. But it
yeah.
was digital. I was just logging in. I was doing exactly the same work. So this is what I was saying. It's like, you got to pick your markets, pick your segment in the industry, and figure out where you can get leverage and efficiency. And if we can find, places to outsource parts of the dev work or design work or what have you, that's a play that can be run to your benefit.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Makes sense. So let's maybe just move forward a little bit to when you got into VC. How did you get started as a VC, or maybe what inspired you to do so? I'm just curious.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I had been working at a research lab for Paul Allen from Microsoft, and I left there and ended up working um, at an organization called Omidyar Network. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it was set up by a guy named Pierre Omidyar. Pierre started eBay,
Oh wow.
and yeah, and he had been running a foundation. He wanted to create an organization that did grant making like a foundation, but also did commercial investment like a venture capital fund. And so this was a strategy that Omidyar Network um, pursued. And I was one of the very early people at Omidyar Network to get that going. And when they brought me in, I wanted to go in as an entrepreneur in residence. I said, "Great, give me some resources, and I'll build a company." And they said, "No, we want you to be an investor." And I said, "That's cool, except for one thing, which is I have never been an investor. I don't know how to be an investor, and I don't want to lose your money." And they said, "No, well, this is what we want you to do." And so I said, "Okay, I'll try it." And that was my introduction to venture capital. I did both grant making and venture capital. I ran the community investment group in the sort of first iteration of Omidyar Network,
Okay.
and I loved it. What I loved about it was the ability to. I like to learn. And with venture, you're always getting to learn something new, looking at different companies and different markets and different technologies with really smart people. So I just find that intellectually stimulating, and a lot of fun. It's my sport these days. Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. So that's interesting how they kind of just threw you in the fire as an investor. So when you first got started, like what was some of your investment criteria? And I wonder if, you maybe made some mistakes along the way when you first started out, just being someone who didn't have experience.
I made a ton of mistakes, man. I made a ton of mistakes, rookie mistakes. I still make mistakes. I'm still learning the business. I think venture capital is one of the last great apprentice businesses. I think it's easier to learn if you've got someone to watch. Um, it's very much a relationship business. I think the it's on the opposite end of the spectrum from, say, public equities, Wall Street. Venture capital is more of a clubby business. You tend to see the same people over and over, which
Mm-hmm.
means you got to behave, because if you don't, or word gets around, your reputation is really what you're trading on,
Mm-hmm.
with entrepreneurs and with other investors. So if you don't do right by folks, you're not going to survive in the business. Um,
Integrity.
but early on, we made decisions based on our strategic objectives. What was it we were trying to achieve? What were the attributes that would get us to those goals? And we would start to filter companies based on those attributes. We saw when we were at the beginning phase, we probably looked at, 1,600 companies in a year, and most of them were not a fit. So we built this filter that would help us rapidly sift through those. Um, I don't look at nearly that many companies these days. I run my fund. I'm the sole decision maker in the fund, and I have been really disciplined about getting clear on our East Side thesis, what that's all about, and having a filter based on that. So I can look at fewer deals, but still find the quality that we're after, and companies that are relevant, for the outcomes we want to see in the world.
Okay, and you brought it up, so let's dive into it. Can you maybe speak to the group about what is your East Side thesis, and what is the objective of Bronze VC today?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, I'll tell you how. Let me start by just discussing how I got to this East Side thesis, which
Mm-hmm.
is I was managing money for a foundation here in California, and they had a very specific, I was running a venture capital strategy for them, and this was a foundation focused on health in 14 specific communities in California. All of these communities were low income communities. And I was sitting in my home office one day in East Palo Alto, also a low income community. It's where I was living. And so I'm sitting in East Palo Alto. I'm looking at a piece of paper of the list of these low income communities. And I'm like, okay, I'm sitting in East Palo Alto. I'm looking on this page and I see East Oakland. I see East Salinas, East Merced, East LA. And I just started to think about why on this list of 14, I'm looking at like 4 or 5 low income communities. Basically a third of them are East something or other. And I just started to think about, why is that the case? And is that just a coincidence with these 14 cities, or is that a broader pattern? And so I started to look into that further, and I started to realize, like, man, East, Harlem, New Orleans East Detroit, east side of Cleveland, on and on and on. In most places, the east side of Austin, all these places, if you look at where low income communities are clustered, they're more often than not on the east side of town. Not always, but usually.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I started to think for years. I'm an anthropologist by training. Um,
That's good.
and so I think a lot about these kind of patterns and social formations and things like that. And it took me years to figure it out and piece it all together. But, at the end of the day, basically, I figured out that the logic that was driving those social formations had to do with particulate matter, pollution, and wind, and that the folks who historically in the U.S. Have been building communities have put people with less power on the side of town with more pollution, because the wind blows from west to east. So imagine if you had a campfire, where the wind blows, who's going to sit with the smoke in their face? That's sort of the logic that's happening at city scale. And when I understood that as the pattern, it kind of blew me away, because it helped me understand that, okay, the way that we have architected our society has been intentional about putting marginalized people on the margins,
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of concentration of poverty and dispossession just doesn't need to be that way. Those are design decisions that someone made.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the opportunity to make different design decisions now, especially if we're talking about investing in technology and refashioning the world that we live in. And so that is really where our East Side thesis was born. And the general idea of that East Side thesis is look for the areas in our society where there are disparities and invest to convert those disparities to prosperity. That's the business that we're in. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's great. And I even commend you for doing all this historical work,
Thank
It's
you.
something that, I never knew about. And, sometimes we're just going through life just thinking like, hey, it is what it is, and this is how things are, and this it's just so normalized, but like you said,
That's right.
are designed with intent, and let's maybe take it a step further and let's talk about how is bronze investments leveraging, uh, your knowledge and your passion to further social good.
Well, everything that we're doing is organized around this East Side thesis.
Mhm.
And for the past several years, that has been entirely focused on our venture capital strategy. And we invest at the very earliest stages of companies, um, seed stage and Series A mostly, which means that if a company is, it may take 7 years, 10 years to exit, get mature and return capital to investors. You're going to have to wait a while to be able to prove your point. So the fund that we just finished investing out of, or almost finished, is a 2016 fund. So we're 4 years into that work,
Mhm.
um, and we're just starting to see the real fruit of that labor. So just today, for example, one of our companies it was announced that one of our companies had got a follow-on investment from Sequoia Capital, one of the best VCs out there, and it's now uh, more than $1 billion company. Those are the kinds of outcomes that I think most VCs hope to get to, and we were fortunate to be able to get to. But I think importantly, got there by investing, with our East Side thesis.
Yeah.
This particular company is in the diabetes space. They're reversing type 2 diabetes, and it's an example of that whole disparity to prosperity thesis, because diabetes as a condition way over indexes for Black and brown folks and poor folks. We are facing the brunt of the disease. It is one of the leading comorbidities with COVID-19.
Mhm.
And the the standard of care, the expected reversal rate for um, type 2 diabetes is 0.4%,
Wow.
right? So if you round that, it's a zero. So if you
Yeah.
go to Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, whoever, and present with diabetes, they will essentially tell you you can't reverse it. Um, the company that we've invested in has a reversal rate of 60%, 60%.
With
Uh,
giving away their secret sauce, how are they doing this?
well, a couple of things. The technology is around continuous remote monitoring. So, uh, they do something that no family physician can do, which is if you are a patient in the Virta clinic, company's called Virta, um, they're collecting data, 3 times a day, multiple times a day, because they've got technology to be able to have this continuous remote monitoring. And, a traditional doctor simply cannot do that. There are also ways that they, through the technology, enable the physicians to remain connected to a higher number of patients, and they can use, guide the patients through diet and other um, behavioral changes to help reverse their condition. And they do this without any drugs, no pharmaceuticals. They do it without surgery, and they're reversing. They get to about a 50% reversal rate after 10 weeks of treating people. So it's really an impressive company, and they've hit this $1 billion mark, but I think they're really still just getting into gear. I think there's going to be a really big financial win, but even more important than that, the goal of this company is to reverse diabetes in 100 million people by 2025.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I think it's an important example of what's possible when you start imagining what the world could look like if we really harvest our best and brightest designers and technologists and give the same level of care that we've given to optimizing ad spend and gaming. It's all great, but if we start applying those great technical minds, strategic minds, business minds to issues that are literally killing us, what a positive impact we can have on our society. And there's plenty of wealth to be created as well, which is
Yeah,
also
yeah.
nice.
Was the founder a founder of color or a founder from an East Side community?
Um, about the farthest you can get from an East Side community. He's from Finland, actually. But that said, look, man, I think we're in a place. A lot of folks ask me about this. Do you want to invest in, black and brown folks? To which my answer is certainly yes, unequivocally. My answer is yes. Do you want to invest only in black and brown folks? My answer is unequivocally no. It's not just about black and brown folks. For the same reason, it shouldn't be just about white folks. Like we need it's all hands on deck. We have
Mhm.
so many problems that need to be addressed, and uh, anyone that has a solution that is going to be additive and push us further forward faster ought to be on the team, in my view.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'm happy to work with anyone, and that's why I really talk about our East Side thesis, because there's room there for everybody. It's more about your values, what matters to you, where are you aligned, and how can you help us win.
okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. So maybe I'm going to ask you a few questions for the entrepreneurs in the room. I'm sure maybe everyone's dying to know, like, what is your investment criteria? What stage are you investing in? What's the check sizes you're cutting? Maybe if you could like just go into some of those details.
Yeah, sure. Um, so I invest mostly early stage, seed and Series A. I'm looking at any category where we can convert disparity to prosperity. That's the East Side thesis. The areas where we're particularly focused include, financial services, health, education, issues that touch criminal justice and that make housing affordable. Thinking a lot about climate and climate impacts. But I'll look at anything that is making life healthier or wealthier for everyday people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, That's fair to say. To say it's almost fair to say that you are industry agnostic, and you kind of approach each
Yeah,
deal with an open mind.
yeah, that's right.
That's cool. Um, any notable investments you've made recently? You don't have to necessarily say the company's name, but like anybody that's doing something very interesting that you invested in recently that you maybe just want to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, well, I talked about Verta. I think they're very interesting. I made an investment in another company called Sugar Break, which is doing. They're creating a consumable. Also, this is in the diabetes space, but they have created a consumer consumable product, kind of like those breath strips that you see at the drugstore.
Yeah,
But
like three
you
strips.
eat, yeah, you no, not the breathe strips, like the Listerine strips.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it has this ingredient in it that if you were diabetic or just not wanting to consume sugar, you'd eat one of those before a meal, and it makes sugar taste weird. So you lose the craving for sugars.
Oh,
So I think yeah, I like that. It's the company is called Sugar Break. Um,
is that designed for kids, or is it maybe for people like adults with diabetes and other health
it's
issues?
it's mostly adults, but it would work with kids as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Sometimes kids need that.
yeah, that's right. That's right. I've got a company called Promise that is doing some really interesting work in the payments space for government in particular. So I think that's going to be a really interesting company. There's a sister who runs that, Phaedra Ellis Lampkins, who's just amazing entrepreneur, and I think really highly of her. So I've got my eye on that company. Um, but all the bronze portfolio companies are up on bronze.vc for folks who want to check them out.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And while you're bringing up the website, bronze.vc, if any of the entrepreneurs in the room want to submit a pitch deck, I'm sure they can submit it through the website as well.
Yeah, I would ask that folks take a look at the website. And as I was saying earlier, I am not trying to um, see the most deals. I'm trying to see the best deals, the ones that are aligned with us. And so the way to our heart is if entrepreneurs spend time with that site, really understand our East Side thesis. And we're really encouraging entrepreneurs that are reaching out to us to help us understand why their particular uh, product or service um, is aligned with our East Side thesis. The clearer they are about that, the better the chance we can get into business together.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So when you're making your investments, of course, you want people to be in line with your mission for social good. But let's talk about maybe the entrepreneur themselves, right? Maybe is there certain characteristics you're looking for in an entrepreneur, a certain level of pedigree or experience? Well, what do you look for? What do you look for in entrepreneurs that you invest in?
It's a great question. Um, I'm looking for a few things, and I should just say for those who are listening, um, I don't think the answer to this question is universal for VCs. I think different VCs have their own sense of what they're looking for different reasons. So I'll give you my answer, but for folks that are trying to understand the space, I would encourage you all to ask the same question of as many people as you can and get a sense of what the different answers are and why they're different. Um, because various VCs have different strategies. Some are consumers, some are enterprise, some are corporate VCs, et cetera, et cetera. And they all have different motivations or can. But, for me, I'm interested in a few things. Like I said, number one, the first question I ask is, how is this opportunity aligned with our East Side thesis or not? Does this person even understand what we mean when we're talking about East Side work? Um, uh, if the answer to that is yes, then I want to know, well, how did you get that understanding? And why are you working on this thing? I personally really like working with entrepreneurs that are doing it for a reason. There's a passion. They have something that they just have to do with this project. that they can't not do. That's what I like to see.
Hmm.
And the reason is because, man, it's so hard to start a company. It is so hard to start a company that there will be multiple occasions where it literally does not make sense to go on. That is
Hmm.
almost always the case in the entrepreneurial journey. And the only way that it will make sense will be, if someone has an irrational passion to solve a problem, you know. And so I'm looking for that thing. It's like you got a chip on your shoulder, you've been violated. It's like me with this Eastside thing. Like I've seen people that I love done wrong, and I have beef with that. And I will go the extra mile to address that issue, even when it doesn't make sense. Like that's just my thing. Like I get hot about that,
That's
and that gets me out of bed in the morning. And it's because they're people that I love. And I think that love is a competitive advantage. Like that's my thing. So if someone was, looking at me with the same lens that I look at entrepreneurs, they probably would see that. Like, yeah, this cat's like crazy about this East Side thing. Like, yeah, that's what you want to see. Um, uh, I also like to see the ability for folks to be persuasive and influential and form teams because you need to be able to do all those things to build, companies. And then lastly, I mean, the list could go on, but another thing that I really look for is just deep, deep, deep insight about a product or a category. Entrepreneurs should be smarter about their space than I am. In the same way that a PhD student ultimately should be smarter about their particular area of focus than their sponsoring professor. They should be the expert.
okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. People with drive, ambition, passion, and understanding their space and having domain knowledge. That makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. Um, Maybe can we talk a little bit about when you invest in a company or get involved in a company outside of capital, how else do you give support?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, my game is simple, man. I want to lead the league in assists. I'd
Uh-huh.
like to be the most helpful person that entrepreneurs know. And so that can take many different forms. Surprisingly, for me, it's a surprise. The form that often takes is just being an ear, just being a thought partner, I think being an entrepreneur it can be a very lonely thing.
For sure.
And just being a thought partner that an entrepreneur can trust as they're thinking through different strategic options or new partners, new investors, things like that is really valuable. But we also play a bunch of different roles. Sometimes we're a supporter in trying to help recruit executives. You need to hire a VP or a marketing person or a board member. It helps to be able to say, hey, why don't you talk to one of my existing investors? I've been on back when I had kids. I remember being in the store late at night trying to buy diapers for my kids. And I'm like, picking up diapers and on the phone, trying to help recruit some executive to one of my companies, things like that. Um, Being able to make introductions throughout the ecosystem. So banking relationships, accounting, helping them navigate tax and, just mechanical business issues like that because we're in the business, we see a lot of these things. And they're often second nature to us, but for an entrepreneur who may not have built a company, or may not have built a company with this process before, there are issues around stock options, 409A valuations, audits, things like that even if you've been running a business on your own, may be different if you're doing it in a venture capital context. And so we can help navigate those sorts of things. And then, I'd say lastly is just the brand stamp of approval. I mean, as soon as I get off here, I got, we for example, because they are associated with our firm, our companies get access to credits from Google, cloud credits, for example, things like that. And we try to be a funnel, a resource for those kinds of benefits to accrue to our portfolio companies.
Yeah, that's excellent. And that's something that I'm always stressing to the entrepreneurs that I'm mentoring is, you don't want to just go after a VC with capital. You want to go after a VC who has money but also can bring value, whether it's, like you said, helping you build out your team, bringing technology resources, connecting them with potential clients, etc. You never really want to go after a VC just for a check. So that's good. I like how, you make sure you bring value with intent to your companies. Some people just want to cut a check, and I've met those kind of VCs too, who they really don't care about anything. It's just here's some money and bring it back. You know?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, like I said, there are lots of different styles. It's a it, it's a matchmaking game. When you're talking to VCs, and it ultimately, if you end up doing a deal with a VC, that's a marriage. It's going to be that way for a long time. So it's important to try to find someone. I mean, look, it's hard to raise money. So let's not pretend you can just walk in and have your choice.
For sure.
Um, but it is important, it's counterintuitive. I think the more selective an entrepreneur is, the higher the likelihood they will get funded.
Yeah.
So in other words, if an entrepreneur says, I don't need to talk to enterprise people because I'm doing a consumer deal, or I really am in the food space or environment or whatever it is, and if you approach an investor saying, I'm not talking to these other people, I really want to focus on you, and here's why you are valuable, or your firm is valuable, or your strategy resonates with me, the chances are much higher that you're going to get a lot more engagement if you have that level of focus
Mhm.
versus just spraying and praying, talk to anyone, who will pick up the phone.
Yeah, no, that is true, and that's something I actually want to stress to the entrepreneurs in the room. If you're going out and raising capital, make sure that you're contacting investors who actually invest in your industry. I specifically asked Steven, what stage does he invest in? Someone who's investing, um, you know, at Series C and D and beyond, or almost pre-IPO, is not going to be a good fit for someone who's looking for a pre-seed investment. Sometimes people are
That's
looking at
right.
them like, hey, I just need 50K and you cut $50 million checks. Just give me the 50K, but it doesn't work that way. You got to make sure that you are lining up with people who invest at your stage, invest in your industry, and even more so like someone like Steven, who, maybe is buying into the social good that you're trying to do, or just buying into whatever it is that you're trying to do. Not everyone is looking for social good. Some people are looking for, deep tech. Some people are looking for, whatever the case might be. So it's just important to do your research on those things. Another thing you brought up, you threw out some words from a term sheet, right? Like 409A valuations and things like that. And I think that's another issue, right, with people of color when they go out to fundraise is that we don't even know what a term sheet is. I'm sure the first time that, if you even get to the point of really having a VC to engage with you that sends you a term sheet, you're getting hit with all these terms and all this lingo that you never heard of, never seen
Yeah,
before. you
yeah.
know how do we start bridging that gap? Of course there is the part of the investment community to make more of an effort to invest in people of color, but then I also maybe want to pose a question: what are some things you think that people of color can do themselves to maybe let's get themselves up to speed and even make themselves more competitive in this VC landscape?
Well, um, read a lot. You have the advantage today. When I started in the business, um, terms, term sheets, definitions, the mechanics of how venture capital works were all like parts of the dark arts. Like you couldn't find this information, you know? When I was in business school, I knew I wanted to be a VC, but I didn't fully understand what that meant or how you would do it. I could see what VCs were doing, and I knew they were investing in companies and all that, but I had to go on my own quest to figure out um, these terms and all the things you're asking about. Today, I mean, it's a Google search away, you know, and there are blogs you can read, there are audiobooks, there are podcasts. I mean, there is no shortage of resources that can help demystify what's going on. I also think it's invaluable to just get into the habit of reading industry, media. So whether it's TechCrunch or whatever, and you're seeing what other entrepreneurs are doing and
Mm-hmm.
who's funding who and what stories they have to share and tell. I think the point that I'm making, it can take many different forms, but if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you need to be voracious about um, absorbing information and synthesizing it very quickly and then building on it. Yeah,
Yeah, great answer. I really like that your answer was reading. In the chat, I just dropped a book called Venture Deal. Did you read that book yet or not,
I've
Stephen?
read that book. Yeah, I've read that book. Yeah.
Yes, I think that is a really good introduction to venture capital and, what is a term sheet and all the things that goes into a venture capital deal. So if anybody is currently raising, I just dropped a link in there for venture deals on Amazon. Highly recommend it. And yeah, you're completely right in your thesis. We really do live in a time today where anything you want to know, anything you want to learn is at your fingertips. You could easily hop on a Google search. You can easily go find a podcast. Any good books or podcasts that you would recommend for a beginner who wants to learn more about venture capital?
There's a podcast that was started by a friend of mine, Ruben Harris, called Breaking into Startups. I think that one is excellent.
You mean breaking into
I mean,
VC?
breaking into, I think it's Breaking into Startups,
Okay.
VC.
Okay.
Um, I mean, look, that universe is vast. It almost doesn't even make sense to name onesie twosie. I would say be voracious. Get out there and poke around. These things are easy to find. Just start searching.
Yeah, that's true. You search and you
Yeah,
will find.
yeah, that's right. It's so much easier today. And if you look, let's be real. If you're not willing to do the work of, if all you got to do these days is type in like, how do I learn about VC term sheets, and do the work to like read that, that's not a super tall order. Um, you should be able to figure that out. If you're not willing to figure that out, to do the work to do that, um, chances are you're not going to be successful as a venture-backed entrepreneur, because it will take a similar process of, in building a company, you are just constantly, multiple times every day, solving problems to things you don't know anything about.
Yeah.
So it's actually, uh, for a very experienced entrepreneur, something like figuring out, oh, I've never seen a term sheet, that a great entrepreneur would look at that sort of scenario as like, oh, well, this is fun. This is like a puzzle that I get to play today,
That's
and they
true.
and they go figure it out. So it's less about the term sheet per se, and it's more about how can I figure out how to solve problems. And that's what a great entrepreneur does.
Yeah, yeah. I want to add on to that. Not just how do I figure out how to solve problems, but also having a commitment to learning. Not, if learning something on your own is a challenge for you, then I don't know. Like you just said, this might not be the game for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. You can save a lot of people a lot of time and a lot of money by figuring out what you're good at or really interested in, what you enjoy doing. And if problem solving ain't it, uh, entrepreneurship may also not be it, because that's kind of what it is,
Yeah, yeah. I think the other issue on the flip side of that is that with social media, it's just like people, we're just seeing entrepreneurs and all you see is the success and you just see like, these people like Grant Cardone who just saying like, hey, just work hard and you could be a multi-millionaire like me, and I think also people maybe just like maybe have like a little bit of a warped perspective on what it
Yeah,
means to be successful as an entrepreneur and what it really takes.
yeah. I think that's a great point, Jeff. It is entirely possible to be the kind of problem solver we were just talking about and work really hard and
Mm-hmm.
have a great idea and be able to raise the money and be able to build the team and still fail in your business. It's actually pretty easy to do that.
That's very
The
true.
the folks who succeed as entrepreneurs, whether they admit it or not, whether they even know it or not, tend to have all those things I just named and a really important ingredient called luck. And I think the best entrepreneurs uh, acknowledge that and they know it. I think most of us who work in this space see it and know it. And I think people don't talk about that enough because it's real. I mean, that's just part of it. Now, at the same time, uh, what's the phrase? Luck is what happens when what is it? Luck's what happens when preparation meets something. I'm butchering it now, but
Opportunity. Preparation means
yeah,
opportunity.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I mean, the point is you can manufacture luck to some extent, but but I guess what I'm saying is uh, success in entrepreneurship is not necessarily something that is like, if I get A plus B plus C, well, I'm definitely going to win. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work that way. It's a high risk endeavor, and because of that, I'm willing to look at folks that have failed. Failing in a business doesn't mean that you have failed as an entrepreneur. And there can be some really important learning that comes from failure that can be reapplied to the next effort and
Yeah.
make you go faster and make you more likely to win the next time. And I think that's generally a view among venture investors as well. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. You know what? That's I agree with that. And I know like when I used to work in finance, that was another very real thing too, right? They always wanted to see like, are you a person who has faced adversity and how do you handle adversity? If you're a person who can't fail and get right back up and get going or, face immense challenge and get back up and keep going, then, these things aren't for you because you're going to face challenges. You're going to have all kind of failures and you got to get up and keep going.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's true. So, I think we had a great conversation tonight. I maybe just want to open up Q&A to the crowd. So if anyone has any questions, you can actually just drop your question in the chat and I'll read it out loud. And, Stephen can answer, for the last 20 minutes before we head out.
I would love to see some faces too. Folks want to just speak
Actually,
their question.
we could let them ask the questions out loud. Dana B is raising her hand. So I'm going to unmute Dana. And Dana, you can ask your question.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for your time and thank you for facilitating this. Definitely
Feel free
not
to turn
camera
your
ready.
camera on too. No, why not? Come on, man.
Okay, sure. I'm willing to embarrass myself.
This is a people business. There we go. Hey,
Hey, good evening.
hey. Hi.
So, my question is, in the startup space, I'm finding now that people's product or service is something like an application, and that most likely they can start themselves and build and scale it themselves. But in the case of your product actually being a hardware or a machine, where you have the idea for that in the business model, what advice would you give as far as finding funding for like prototyping, or do you just pitch what you have? Like, how can you flesh that out more if what you're actually trying to build is something complex and not just like a
Yeah.
application?
No, that's a great question. I mean, a couple of thoughts. One is, um, there are various outfits that are totally focused on prototyping hardware and things like that. And one thing that I've seen entrepreneurs do is go to those sorts of resources and make them a partner. And one of the things you have the potential to do is, if you have an idea, you have equity. You could give them shares in the idea and say, I'm gonna give you, you know, 1/4%, 0.5% of my company, 1%, whatever. Yeah, that's negotiated. And if you make the investment to help me get this hardware done, so I can then go raise money, this is what I'll give you in exchange. And so, you can. I like the idea of karate. You say karate, like karate chop. But karate actually, it's kind of like Chinese kanji. Karate means empty hands. It's basically that story that I told about starting my first, web development business when I didn't have a computer. That was empty hands. You got it. That's part of what, to me, the beauty and the craft and the creativity of entrepreneurship is. It's like, when you have empty hands, how can you get others to be on your journey with you? And one of the things you have to work with is your equity and your creativity. And so get people bought into your vision. Tell them why this piece of hardware is going to change the world and why they want to be part of that. Get them excited about it, and then do the mechanical work of figuring out how they can share in the value. And you might be able to, use that to get people to push you forward fast.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks.
You got it. Thank you for showing yourself.
Thank you for the question, Dana. Sadale has another question. Let me unmute you. I hope I said your name right. If I did not, please forgive me.
No, that's perfect. It's Sadell. Yeah, I loved hearing a bit about your background with the Omidyar Group and the grants process there. And our company, Open Grants, we actually streamline grant funding for entrepreneurs. I just wanted to hear your thoughts and your perspective on like the role grant funding should play for entrepreneurs working in tech, and how you see that. Like, as an investor, are you always like happy and encouraging, or do you see downsides to grant funding? Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's grant funding is a beautiful thing because it's non-dilutive capital. Anytime you can bring resources into the company and not have to give up your equity, I think that's generally a good thing, from a pure math perspective. Having worked on both sides, and I know the grant world pretty well, there are also some downsides to it, because I think I'm making some assumptions about your project, but I'm gonna hazard a guess that part of what you're helping people navigate are all of the strings that come with these grants, because you got to write reports, you got to deal with those institutions that are issuing the grants. And so it's it's that phrase that there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? And so, like, people talk about grants as if they're free money, but they actually cost quite a bit of time, and they can also constrain you from a regulatory standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, because a lot of grants have strings attached saying, here's money, but you got to spend it this way. Here's money, you have to spend it within this time frame, or only with these people, or only with these partners. And that can paint a company into a corner. So I'm generally, I look kindly upon grants, but I also look cautiously and try to understand where the hidden, costs may be, whether it's time or administration.
Yeah, awesome.
Great question. Thank you, Sadale. Malik has a question. Let me unmute you. There we go.
Hello, how's it going? My name is Malik with Menu Bubble. I just had a question regarding of those companies that are pre-seed. What are your stance for companies that reach out and regarding to start to build like a relationship with a company or VCs like yours, while they're in the early stages?
I generally think it's a good idea from an entrepreneur perspective. I think it's a great idea from an entrepreneur perspective. If I were an entrepreneur, I'd be trying to talk to, get to know, get a general vibe with as many investors as I could. From my perspective, let me see, let's do a real time. I don't know if y'all can see this. Let's see, I'm trying to do, my inbox. I don't know if you can see that number. It's 30,499. Okay. That's what I'm dealing with on the other end. And so, I get a lot of requests from folks who are saying two things that I hear a lot, and I don't like hearing either one. One is, I want to pick your brain. Again, this is just my personal thing, but like that just sounds nasty and usurious to me. Like, I don't want to have my brain picked. I'm down to be a thought partner or help or whatever, but I personally don't want to have my brain picked. And a lot of people ask for that. The other one is like, folks say, let's have coffee. And I can't drink that much coffee. Like there's, so it's hard. I would like to be able to just hang out and talk to entrepreneurs who want to just get to know me or the business or what have you. But I've got limited opportunity to do that, which is why I try to do things like this, where I can, in one period of time, talk to many people. And Jeff and I have been coordinating this it's been months, trying to get this like 60, 90-minute thing going. So so my answer to you is, double-edged. One, you absolutely should do it from your perspective as an entrepreneur. You should try, and I think it's a good thing. And I'm also sharing the flip side from an investor perspective, which is I do genuinely think it's a good thing, not just for you, but for me. Like like I said, I personally enjoy hearing from entrepreneurs and learning about what people are building and what's going on in the market. I actually, it's valuable to me and I enjoy it. But what I'm sharing is I just have a very real time constraint. So I don't get to do it as much as I would like to. So I guess that is to say, I wouldn't take it personally if an investor can't spend the time to do that or doesn't respond, because there are 30,000 people right here that I'm not responding to right now. And it's not because I don't think they're worthy. It's because I literally cannot get through all these. I declared email bankruptcy two years ago. I was like, I can't, and I used to just kill myself trying to like swim to the top of my inbox. And I finally got to the point where I realized like, I can't, man, I can't. And so I just ask people to like, please forgive me if I don't respond. But it's also why I'm trying to encourage people to think about that East Side thesis, think about why it's relevant. And to the extent that people are clear about making themselves known, like, hey, this is an East Side deal. I know what you're trying to do. I know what the big story is about. Here's why we should be working together. That's easier to get to the top of that inbox.
That makes
Thank
a
you.
lot of sense. And I even just want to tack on to that as well. I sometimes find that early stage entrepreneurs really feel like, shy about building relationships, not just with investors, just with even like potential customers, potential enterprise customers down the road. And I think sometimes people don't really see the value in building and maintaining relationships. So for all the entrepreneurs in the room, if there's someone that you would like to reach out to, don't be afraid. I would say, just circling back to what Steven said, in the VC case or even in a customer case, make sure that there is some kind of synergy or some kind of value that you could bring to them that, will make them say like, hey, this is somebody to pay attention to, even if it's not a person for now. I like what they have going on. And, just the power of connections and network is just infinite, so don't be afraid to try to build connections and relationships.
I would completely second that, Jeff, and just double click on one part of that point, which had to do with talking to customers, which I think is something that entrepreneurs don't do enough usually. I love hearing when when I was an entrepreneur, I was running this company for Paul Allen. I remember the first time I raised venture capital money. I flew to New York. I met with this fancy lady in a fancy dining room for breakfast one day. And I'm like, oh man, I'm doing it now. This is the VC life. Like, I'm doing it. Sat down and, silverware and all. But she sat down and she asked me, okay. So I gave her my little pitch and she said, well, who's your customer? And this was like a media search deal. And I'm like, oh, well, our customer, yeah, I got that. In my head, I'm like, I know this one. Yeah, cool. Easy question. Who's your customer? I'm like, oh, well, these are, web users, mostly video, they're like 20 to 32 years old or whatever. I gave her demographics. And she's like, okay, but who's your customer? And to myself, I'm like, lady, I just told you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what are you not hearing? And I learned an important lesson that day, because we went around that loop a few times and of me repeating myself. And she was like, no, what I'm asking you is who is going to write you a check. And I'm not asking you that in some abstract way. I'm asking you literally who. That's what I love to hear as an investor. If an entrepreneur could come in and tell me, and I say, well, who's your customer? And they tell me, well, let me about, Lisa, who's the buyer at this place. And like, I've already talked to Lisa, and here's the thing she loves about us. And here's where I know we can get more on price, but she really needs us to deliver in this certain time frame. And that's different than, Jake, who's over here, and he needs this and he needs that. But he won't pay as much, but we can get, this thing. He has a bunch of volume. When there are specifics, and I know that an entrepreneur knows her customer set and the nuances between them. This guy, he's going to sign up. He's going to pay us late. He's going to pay us a lot. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Then I feel like, okay, this is someone who really understands their market. They understand what's driving customer behavior. They understand what's driving sales. And that's revenue, which is the lifeblood of a company. So I just say all that to say that I think Jeff really hit the nail on the head as it relates to talking to customers. It's one of the highest value things that you can do, and you can control. You can also control it for free, because you can get a lot of that customer intelligence, karate, right? Empty hands. You can build a lot of value just by talking to the folks you intend to sell to, of so many kinds. Even if the sister asked the question about building the hardware, if you go to the customers, they can help you define your specification for that hardware, because it's expensive to make design revisions, especially if you're doing hardware. If you're doing web design, you can tweak a little bit of code and like have a totally different product. With hardware, you got molds and lead times and delivery shipments and all sorts of stuff that is incredibly expensive. And so you can lean on customers, essentially for free, to get the intelligence to make sure that you're building a product that they actually want.
Yeah. No, that is definitely a great answer. And I disagree all the way. Like, talk to customers as much as you can, and, build relationships with future customers. Someone might not be a customer today, but, you might get your product, get your business to a certain point, get your business to a certain scale. And, I just believe that, business is not just about who you know, but who you can get on the phone,
Yeah, that's right.
So that's good to build customer relationships.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Malik. We got to get you a bronze T-shirt. I mean, I see what Techstars. That's cool, but
Any other questions from anybody else in the room?
I believe Anoop was trying to ask a question.
Oh, yes. All right. Let me unmute Anoop. All right.
Thank you. First, I'd like to say I love your TED Talk with the East Side Smoke. I teach geography at the College of Staten Island.
Oh, wow.
So,
okay.
So that video has been on my syllabus for like the last 5 years.
Oh,
and
wow.
I have it right next to Majora Carter's video, like Greening the Ghetto, and
that's my girl. Yeah.
They all flow well together. Yes, I wanted to say thank you for that. And I like that you're an anthropologist and a venture capitalist. I think a lot of times we're too often like so rigid, you know, in what takes us where. And I think we need more of the social sciences. And my question to you, you said you like irrational passion, you know, and every at least VC I've heard says they love this. But at what point is irrational passion just like a fool's errand? Because I've been running my startup now for like 5-6 years, and a lot of people are telling me, like maybe not. But for me, this is my life, and it ties in with geography. And to me, this is my like dissertation, but I won't get credit for it necessarily.
Yeah, I get it.
And so I'm curious, how do you deal with that divide?
It's a good question, Anoop. It's a really good question, man. And it's like, you know, where are the other metaphors, like the thin line between love and hate, or the fine line between genius and madness? It's like, it's thin, bro. Like, it's thin, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, I guess the best way I can put it is, I think a true entrepreneur is doing the thing that he or she can't not do.
Okay.
Like, if you try to, you could try to turn it off. You know, if it goes off, that wasn't it.
Yep. Okay.
You know, an entrepreneur will try to turn it off, and they're like, I can't stop thinking about this thing. You know, and people will be saying, oh, you know, bronze is that for me. People have been telling me my whole career, why do you try to do all this social impact thing? Oh, Steven, you're such a smart guy. Why don't you go work at a bank or something? You just make all your money and then you give it away later. You'd help more people. You have more fun. And that just never sat well with me. And my career, candidly, has been harder because of it.
Yeah.
Because I've been swimming against the tide. You know, I've been swimming upstream. But if you're a salmon, that's what makes sense. If you're a salmon, that's how you get home, you know? And it's a lonely crusade, homie. You know, to be an entrepreneur is hard because, you know, by definition, you are building something that other people don't see. And so the world is probably going to look at you a little funny for most of the time until you build the thing. And then people can see it. You're a translator, you know. I think what's challenging about it, though, and to your point, you know, and this fine line that we talked about, is it is also possible to be that passionate and be wrong.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you could be swimming upstream for a long time, and then you know, get there and you realize, oh man, my GPS coordinates were off, and it's just the wrong spot. But that's the beauty of this thing too, you know. Like, it's a high risk thing. It's high reward. But for someone who really has a passion about the thing that they're building, I don't think there's any loss in that. Because if you're really doing it for the passion, the money is like, that's a nice byproduct. But it's really the journey. I mean, I'm a mountain climber too, you know. I think most people who don't understand mountain climbing, the first question they always ask is, did you get to the summit? You know, and if you talk to real hardcore mountain climbers, what they are talking about is the journey to get there, the journey to even get to the base of the mountain, all the stories, the campfire stories on the way up, what happened when you saw this thing, or, you know, what have you. It's the love of the journey. That's what entrepreneurs do. They love the journey, which is why many of the best entrepreneurs don't stop after one company, because it wasn't about just solving that thing. They like solving the puzzle, and they work that muscle. And so once they've built one company, why stop? You know, it's a thing they love to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
You know, I actually also want to add on to that. And I think sometimes as entrepreneurs, we got to take a real look at also what we're building. Of course, things are passion projects, but you got to maybe take a real hard look at your business traction. You know, is your customer base growing? Are you talking to your customers and getting feedback from them about your product? You know, do they like what you're offering? Like, you know, what you're offering might be passionate for you, might be a passion project for you, but if your customers don't love it or isn't solving a major issue for them either, then maybe this passion project shouldn't be a business. So I think you also need to take a real hard look at your business traction. And I would say start with the customers. Talk to your customers, understand what they want, understand what they like about your product, understand what they don't like about your product, and make those changes and pivots. I think sometimes, we're pursuing passion projects and we just have this one track mind about like, hey, I want this thing to be this way, but that's not what the customer wants, or maybe the way you want it, it's too expensive and you need a different business model. Like, so I just want to say maybe just also open up your mind to really like reflecting on what you've done. I think you said you've been running your company for like 5 years. So, it's a lot of time to, say like, hey, I've done X, Y, Z. What's working? What isn't working? What are the issues? I know like myself as an entrepreneur, one of my biggest challenges wasn't my product or my services. It was my self-discipline. And the better I became with my self-discipline, the more my revenue grew. I'm just using myself as an example. And another thing, one of my mentors taught me when I used to work at the hedge fund, he was a serious guy, really big guy. I used to say, I remember I was going through like a really rough trading stretch and I was just like hitting my head against the wall and just like, hey, Pete, like winners never quit. Winners never quit. I'm going to keep doing this thing. And then he said, Jeff, winners actually quit and, they quit things that aren't working early and move on to the next thing and keep quitting until they find something that works. And then they just double down and triple down on that thing that works, So I don't know, these are things that no one can really give you the answer of if you should keep going or if you should not, if you should keep going or not. But I just want to say this, you got to really do that self-reflection, really analyze.
Well, I'm definitely going to keep going. I appreciate the translator aspect. My issue is I'm very good at talking to people. So my project is a peer-to-peer project, right? Like many other companies that exist. So when I talk to people, they love the idea and they love me. The problem is I had zero technical knowledge.
Okay.
And so every time, and a lot has changed in terms of technology over the last 5 years, where things are now a lot simpler than they were the previous 5 years. And so when I hear the feedback from some of the customers, some of the traction we get, I want to keep going. But the problem is the money that I put into it is more than what I'm getting back. And so that's a little bit of the issue in terms of how it impacts like my family, and the other things that because otherwise I'll just do it forever. But
yeah.
You're definitely right. You're definitely right, Jeff. I have been looking at everything with an open mind, which is why I also asked the question, because at some point it's like, I don't know if I should keep doing it, but I appreciate both of your guys' advices and I'll be sending it to you in the future. So
Yeah. Just let I'm big on intuition. I let my intuition and my spirit guide me, So hey, if your spirit says go with it, I'm with you all the way.
Thank you.
Okay. Malik, you have another question? Let me thank you for the question, a really good question. And let's connect offline and we can talk more about your business because I like figuring out challenges to problems.
Sounds like a plan, Jeff. Thank you.
Good. Okay, Malik.
All right. Yeah, last question as well. With one of the previous companies I worked with in startup phase and raising funds, one of the roles that we hit was like they didn't want to invest first. So I was wondering regarding your VC, do you ever use the intent to invest in regarding of like, all right, once you have a certain milestone or a certain other group invest that you'll like kind of follow up with investment as well? Or is it strictly just based off of what you see at that moment?
I see this a lot. Investors tend to get real polite, when there's uncertainty. They're like, after you. No, after you. And then when there's certainty, like a company gets a big contract or something, then the knives come out and they're like, no, me first, I got first right, that sort of thing. I try to have my own conviction about companies, regardless of what others do. That said, I do, because as I was saying earlier, venture is a small universe. There are a limited number of investors. those of us with similar strategies tend to invest together over and over. And so if I see a deal with someone that I know and that I've worked with in the past, it can be a very good sign, because I do know them and I've worked with them and I understand how they look at deals and how they process things, and there's some trust. Often we've been on board together or things like that. So that's a thing to take advantage of. And as you were asking previously, Malik, about getting to know, investors, one of the things that's really useful to ask them is, who do you work with? Who do you invest with? And go talk to all those folks. And when you talk to those folks, ask about the other investor that introduced you or made you aware of this other person. Because eventually what will happen is you'll go around the community and you'll start figuring out where the edges of that universe are. And again, if you do that homework, you will be that much better prepared when it comes to pitch. Because you could not only come to a person like me and say, look, this is an East Side deal. Here's why I think it is. Here's why I'm talking to you specifically. But here's who else I think would be good in a syndicate with us, and here's why I would want them around the table. When an entrepreneur comes in with that level of specificity, it really is special, because with venture, as with most other parts of, work and life, most people just don't work that hard. Most people are not that clear. They don't do, just a little bit more prep work can get you a lot further. So I would ask those questions and help you. But it's relatively common for folks to say, hey, we're interested, but you need to go find a lead investor. That's a thing you'll hear a lot.
Okay. And I do want to also ask, in the writing of, for companies that you pitch from you, and then you give them the no, would it be okay for that company to push for a letter of intent, all right, come to agreement of hitting a certain milestone that it's okay to come back to try to get investment from your firm? Or are you more once you say no, it's kind of done until you're in a different light in the writing of how your company is ran or stuff like that?
Yeah. I think it's a good question. I think it's always a conversation. I think it's okay to ask. I would do it in a way that's not belligerent. I've had people go off on me if I tell them it's not a fit, and they'll go off and tell me why I don't know what I'm talking about, or I've made the biggest mistake of my career. Y'all see, and it's this is just playground level, EQ. Who wants to? I don't want to deal with that. I got 30,000 emails. The next thing I want is some buster all in my chops about why I don't want that. I don't think any person would, you know what I mean? But if you strike me as a very thoughtful guy. If I said Malik, this doesn't fit our thesis or whatever, and your comeback was, I hear that, I see, here's where I think it may intersect in the future, or there's this thing that didn't quite come across. Is there anything, is there any milestone that we could hit that would potentially make you interested? And give me the opportunity to say, well, yeah, if you did this, that would be interesting, yeah. I'll give you an example. I work with a guy now who I'm not formally invested in out of my fund, because it doesn't meet the requirements that I have. But this guy asked me to help him build a shrimp company, and he reached out to me, and I'm like, shrimp? Nah, bro, I can't really help you. I'm doing software deals and everything. But on the dimension that you're talking about of going back to an investor, he's actually the most successful person that I have personally dealt with, because I told him no, and he kept coming back to me for 3 weeks, and kept me on the hook the whole time. And I was politely trying to say no, and he always had some reason to like reel me back in. Like, here's why we should keep talking. And long story short, I just love this guy, you know, and we're like years into a relationship, and I try to, you know, counsel him and advise him just because I like him. I want to see him win. You know what I mean? And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with not taking no as final, with taking no as, so you're saying there's a chance, you know, and figuring out what that chance is. I mean, that is part of the entrepreneurial journey, you know. And if you're going to be like that with investors, be like that with customers, and be like that with partners, and be like that with people that you're trying to hire. Like, no is, it's entire. I guess what I'm saying is it's entirely okay to not speak the language of no, and be like, huh? No, I don't really hear that. You know, I need some other translation. Tell me, like, in the form of yes. What do you mean by no? You know?
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. Great question, Malik, and thank you as always, Stephen, for the answer. We reached 8 o'clock, you know, so I just want to tell everybody, thank you for coming out tonight. Stephen, once again, thank you so much. I think we had such a great conversation, very insightful conversation. I'm truly, honestly, personally honored to have you here and even be able to have like this conversation that, you know, we coordinated with you. So just thank you so much for being here. Thank you for, you know, getting involved with our incubator program. And I really look forward to, you know, doing more work with you, and hopefully we can send you some good deals that, you know, that where we have some founders who's doing some interesting stuff, you know, in the social impact land.
Looking forward to it, man. I'm really glad to be here, and I think there's more to come.
Yes, for sure, for sure. All right, thank you, everybody. And let me just make sure. Okay, yeah, thank you, everybody, and everybody have a good night. We will follow
Thank
up
you all.
with a recording of this video. Also, I just want to say for everyone that's in the room, if you are raising, you have a pitch deck, feel free to send it over to, you know, to respond in the email with your pitch deck, and I'll be more than happy to look it over and share with any VCs that's in the network. All right.
Very good.
Good night.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. See ya.